is sometimes quite a show, actually, whether we want it to be or not. So,
Right.
so what happened was we were discussing, so recently, apparently, in the world of social media, a billionaire bought a particular company, and everyone is rejoicing because he promised to restore free speech to us. And so that made us start talking because since when is free speech something that one person controls and can gift to other people versus not? So we got going this morning, and
Yeah.
so now we've had lunch, and I have coffee.
You drink coffee in the morning too, so we always have discussions. So that's my coffee
Right, we
time
have coffee time with
Pastor
Mama.
Joseph. And
Yeah, we sit there and eat. Hi Eric.
Hi.
How's everything going upstairs?
Good.
Okay, we're live,
Nothing.
so can you keep
No,
everything
I
calm?
was just coming down here,
All right.
so I made sure you didn't hear the music we are listening to.
Okay, so you're checking to
Oh.
see if
Yeah,
you're too
on the
loud
phone,
upstairs.
yeah.
All right.
You're good. Thank you for checking, buddy.
So he had to come to make sure that his music wasn't too loud upstairs. All right, so we're in the morning when I make my coffee, and we actually did, and talk with. I'm chatting with Stacy, and I'll just start telling her all the things that I've been thinking about for the last couple of days and everything that's going on, and so she gets to have these coffee talks with me where it
Right.
either makes sense or sometimes it turns into a debate. And this morning, one of the things we actually talked about was the fact that in in our families of origin where we come from, we have times when there are some things that are not as like, for instance, in my family, we didn't do physical touch. And so later on, when I discovered physical touch, I had to figure out how to do this properly because it was actually something that I really craved, but I couldn't just go, hug everybody I saw. I had to be very careful and learn how to properly do appropriate physical touch. And then you said, how did we get to that point where you said the thing about debate and argument?
That I love to debate and argue.
Oh.
That side.
Yes. Oh, I think it was you were saying you felt as a child. See, I always as a boy, I always felt kind of disgusting and gross, and I was like, nobody would ever want to touch me.
Because y'all only took baths every so often,
Right.
and y'all's haircut and clothes and all of that. So you struggled with feeling like you're just a little bit on the
grungy side.
Yeah.
And so
not attractive.
So especially if, like, if I saw a pretty girl, I'd be like, well, she doesn't want to be too close to me. She doesn't want to touch me. She doesn't, And so, but I wanted to be respected and loved by people. And so that was actually one of those cravings then that I had where I was like, well, I want to be loved by everybody and not to feel like I'm disgusting. And so
Right.
when I learned physical touch and properly ways of showing affection, I began to implement that into the way I greeted people in a way that was appropriate, but was also satisfying a very strong craving from my childhood.
Right. We were just sort of talking about wounds like that, our self-perception. I struggled a lot with being dyslexic when I was younger, or struggling to read, and especially struggling to spell. And so I began to feel like I was stupid. And just, again, that self-image that you have. I was like, I don't think I'm as intelligent as everybody else. My sister below me could win spelling bees. My sister above me was very physically strong and plenty smart. And so I just always felt like I was weak and a little bit dumb. Just like subconsciously, like that's your view of yourself. And so as I grew up, I had to get that healed before the Lord all the way. And but then he was marking, that's why you like to debate so much. And
Right.
I think that is that part of my love for that confrontation and debate and stuff was to hash out ideas, to be able to show that I knew what I was
prove
talking
that you're
about.
smart.
Yeah,
To prove that you can say something.
something like
Yeah.
that.
So
Anyway, that's a long
yes.
rabbit trail for
That is, well,
free speech. That's how we got on the discussion this morning. Is this
we're allowed to talk about whatever we want, right? Because it's free speech. Just say what you want to say. Let the chips fall where they land. Just do it.
No, I started saying, okay, what exactly is the wording of what we have? Because people always blow these rights out of proportion or in a weird direction. So you'll hear it and you'll be like, I don't think that's at all what the founding fathers had in mind when this was created. What does it actually say? Are we quoting the actual thing? Or are we quoting somebody else who quoted somebody else? And anyway, it turns into
Right, and
silliness.
specifically because we are Christians in America, we have the question of, okay, what does it mean, free speech? Because it's tied to our right to gather. It's tied to our ability to get together with other believers. It's tied to be able to speak, to share the gospel. It's all tied into that. And so, but I feel like sometimes we don't even know what it means. So what we did today was we actually went and grabbed the original, not the original.
Wording.
We grabbed the original wording. We don't have the original document.
That's in Washington D.C. right or somewhere.
Yeah.
Probably.
So in the Bill of Rights, I have here. Let's see, right here. We'll hop over to the Bill of Rights, and I'll just put us up here in the corner. There we go. All right, so over here we have Amendment number 1. So we have the entire Constitution, then we have the Bill of Rights that goes after it. And in fact, the Constitution itself could possibly have been voted down and not ever passed had it not been for the promise that we're going to make amendments. And so they wrote it with the plan of making amendments. So they didn't write it and say, oh, we forgot. No, they were fully thinking, okay, we're going to say this. This is what it means. So when you read the Constitution, you'll read certain things. You say, okay. So they're talking about states' rights. They're talking about human rights. They're talking about the right of government. They're talking about all of that. And then they say, and we're going to make sure that we have some we have these other amendments that we're bringing. So they bring in
Can I say
Bill of
before we
Rights.
read it?
Yes.
That always keep in mind what was happening historically. And so what's going on right now, we all know, is that they were many Americans had come over from Europe being persecuted, religious persecution, where what the king said was law, or if you didn't agree with the official religion of that country, you could be considered a criminal of the state. And anyway, so you've got all these issues going on, which are highly influencing what they're putting into this document, because religious freedom is huge on their minds. They want this to be a very different country with that. And so and then of course there's the specific things that King George was doing to them at this time as well, of taxing them without representation and housing his soldiers in their houses.
So there's very specific things that they're
going
talking
on.
About. And so some of them show up here. Like, for instance, they were dealing with terrorism, Islamic terrorism in that time. A lot of the pirates were that. But you don't necessarily see all of that show up in this document. But when you go back and you research, you see that when they later were talking about other laws, they would bring in all of the scenarios, and you realize these were real people in a real time frame, and they were actually talking about things that were truly impacting everyone. So for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they're trying to help create a government that allows the people, the individual people of the United States, to actually live according to their faith and according to their conscience. So let's look at this again over here. So we have here, I'll just roll my mouse over there. Amendment number 1 says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Official wording.
That's the official wording. And so if you say free speech, we got First Amendment rights, whatever. Okay.
Means I can say whatever I want. That's not exactly what it says there.
Right. So it's the fact that it just says there shall be no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of people to assemble. That's really important for us to see this and not to make it something that it's not. So
again, I'm thinking, what do they have on their mind? They're like that people peaceably assembling is going to be either for religious reasons, or we've used this for protesting the government kind of reasons. And they were having that situation happening. But then freedom of the press, again, very much a freedom to critique the government in the newspaper, was oddly enough, such a weird freedom that it's going to be number 1 on their thing. But it was so important in that time. What was going on, that they needed accountability.
I just have to make a note. I'm doing these things, moving us around on the screen, and I'm kind of jumping a couple times. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be nice and smooth, but it's not working all the time. So anyhow, and so
the freedom of speech is going to be heavily in that context when we think about it. It is the freedom for us to say that we disagree with our government and the way that they're running it.
Mm-hmm.
or what the truth really is in a situation, or those kind of things. It does not say that all Americans have the freedom to say whatever they want. That's not exactly the way that it's worded, although sometimes it wants to be applied that way.
Well, and
This
I
is talking
I think
about-
it's important also to think about how we talk to other people and how we talk with each other, because within a context,
Because there are some wrong ways
well, for instance, a couple of
that you can get in trouble with the law for what you say, correct?
maybe 2020 or so. I'm trying to remember when some of these alternative social media platforms were coming out, and everyone was going, woo-hoo, free speech, we can go do whatever we want over there. And so next thing you know, these people are having to come out, like the creators of the social media sites are coming out and saying, it's actually illegal to post pornography, and child pornography is very illegal, and you're not allowed to come here on this site and do that. That is
Yeah,
not
I remember
okay.
when they were trying to push that to say that posting pornography was free speech. And you're like, you want to go read that Constitution again? Like, what are we talking about here, folks?
But also, if you want to, like,
it's not even speech for one thing.
if the Constitution is coming in with is just reaffirming rights that are given us by our Creator, which that's what the Constitution claims to be, then we
Being able
need
to
to
say
go
whatever
to the
we want.
Creator and say, what can we do? And this is in a case like pornography, we're taking something that is sacred and belongs to somebody, their personal space, their who they are, and it's being broadcast for other people's illegitimate enjoyment. And so we have a real issue on multiple levels. And so to just say, well, I can say what I want, I can do what I want because look, I have this, not quite. And this is I think,
Our rights end where another's, what is this?
their sacred rights begin.
Yes.
Where your sacred space begins is where my rights end.
Right. So in freedom of speech, with speech, there are some laws against certain forms of speech that are actually
Correct.
prohibited in America. We were going to bring that up, I think.
Well, so there's words. We have words. So
Right.
if I and we discussed this morning, and I looked it up, and it's funny because I think the dictionaries are changing slightly. So when I remember learning this a long time ago, slander is when I'm speaking evil of you and I'm spreading gossip and rumor. Did we tell them what you're drinking in your cup?
No.
You should tell them.
It's what I've drunk almost every time we're here. It's kefir, water kefir,
So it has
with grape flavoring.
grape juice
And water.
and water kefir.
Pretty good.
It's not coffee, but I do drink it. I like it in the morning for breakfast before I have coffee.
Goes right along with slander. Like you were
Yes,
saying.
it just fits together with slander. You don't like my bunny trails, do you? Okay, so the thing with slander is if I am gossiping about you, or if I am saying things about you that are not true. So I can make an accusation against you and just speak it out there. And then you come later, or an authority comes later and says, that's not true. So I say, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And then I move on. But I've already spoken the words. So now implanted in everyone's mind is this idea of, well, maybe what I said was true. And so there is this can be actually prosecuted. So I looked it up. But there was another form of this. If you write it, if you publish it, then it was called libel. So if it was written, it was libel. If it was spoken, it was slander. And let's see.
Because you can see how something written could go so far so fast.
And it would be very hard to retract it.
Right. So it was a separate
In fact,
crime, if you will.
remember the story I told on Christmas Eve at the candlelight service about the
Story?
Martin the shoemaker?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
that's right.
So that had a case where somebody took his story that this man had written and published it in an English newspaper and just said anonymous.
Right.
And said, we don't know who wrote it. Well, the guy was still alive. He had actually published it in a book. I think he was from Italy or France
It's
or
different
somewhere.
language, right? It was posted in a different language than the original book.
And so
However.
so then that guy, so Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I think that's the guy who it was then in Russia, found the document in English, translated it back into Russia, embellished it because he thought it was an anonymous story, didn't know where it came from, and republished it only to be contacted by the original author saying, that is actually my story. And so he was like, I'm so sorry. And he genuinely was sorry. but there was nothing he could do because he'd already printed it in all these books, and now it was out in the United States. It was all over Russia. It was
He
everywhere.
printed a retraction saying the story was not his, but it
And so-
doesn't
and-
matter. To this day, people associate him with the story and not the original author.
Yeah, and so
Poor
when
guy.
you print something, it just goes. It just, and this is actually part of what social media is you're putting something in writing about
Right.
people. You're not just speaking to someone, you're putting it in writing. So that would go, you can easily go to the libel defamation. So here is
Am I okay to share a story? We had a situation with a neighbor with slander
yes.
that was very troubling, and just to show how once that reputation's there, even if it's not true, you could have done damage to them. We had a neighbor, older man, who every once in a while would interact with the children in our neighborhood. Well, a different lady got mad at him and decided to report him to the police for sexually abusing children or inviting them into their house and things like that. So the police come knocking at our door because our kids had occasionally played with him and said, you know, this is the accusation. Is anything here? And I was able to talk to Peter, and then just my personal interactions with him. I was like, he never lets the kids in his house. He always does it out in the open. He's done these few interactions, and I don't believe there's anything to this. But he was very concerned. He came to us and he was like, this is serious. This could ruin your ability. Just the accusation to get a job, to do various things. He was like, this is no joke. Even if it's not true that someone has accused you.
Well, and
of
in
that,
this case,
can
it was a
be-
lady that didn't even have children, and she just made the accusation about him, and in so doing,
Right.
and it was really
It didn't help that she already had made accusations of a whole bunch of people and called the police all the time about various issues.
Right.
So she also had a reputation. But
but yes,
it really struck me about how serious that could be.
That-
Once you plant that seed in somebody's mind that they are not trustworthy,
right.
even if they're proven that they're innocent. So that's why we had these laws about libel and
Right.
slander.
But this
'Cause
is
you
not.
can
So I'm not
really-
actually looking at a law right now. I'm looking at the
Right,
dictionary.
it's not a law.
So here's the dictionary.
Okay, dictionary.
I don't
But
have
I'm
a
just
law.
saying, in America, it's not true that we can just say whatever we want.
Well, that was the original thing. It said not
Right.
abridging. Yeah, because there's other laws that say we can't hurt someone or steal.
There are laws
Yes.
about not being able
Okay.
to say and do certain things.
Here is the this is Merriam-Webster's slander definition of slander. The utterance of false charges or misrepresentations which defame and damage another's reputation. A false and how do you say defamatory oral statement about a person. And so then it says compare libel. So here's libel. Libel, according to Merriam-Webster's, is a written statement. So this is the first one is a written statement in which a plaintiff in certain courts sets forth the cause of action or the relief sought. But if we come down to number 2, this is the one we were just speaking of. A written or oral defamatory statement or representation that conveys an unjustly unfavorable impression. So notice how it says unjustly unfavorable. So it's not just you did something wrong, but it's unjust, unfavorable. So here's also slander on dictionary.com. It says so it's defamation. The accusations are based on hearsay, rumor, or intentional slander, remain undocumented and unproved. And then they go into like their meaning here says the writer is spewing a despicable slander against an 87-year-old man without a shred of proof. So this is now written. I would have called that libel. But then I went to libel on dictionary.com and they say defamation by written, printed, or broadcast words or pictures. And so
They are very related.
So they are very, very, very related there. So we have let's come back to, there we are. Come back to us. So we have these words, whether that's written or spoken, that there is, and this is a real problem. So for instance, when I say, well, it's free speech, I can say whatever I want to say, we have to think of how does this impact other people? Because just because I can say what I want to say doesn't mean that I should say what I want to say. And I wanted to say this specifically, like in the clause in the Bill of Rights that we just read, it had to do with not making any laws concerning an establishment of religion and our free speech and our right to assemble. Well, in our time, not until the last couple of years have I ever felt that my right to assemble was being challenged in the United States. but through the times of COVID, it was definitely being the right to assemble was definitely being challenged and attacked, and that was interesting. I'd never experienced that.
Right.
And so on the
And it does say peaceably assemble. Just going to throw that out
Yeah,
there
it says
because we also
peaceably
had
assemble.
some non-peaceable assembling of rioters in Denver during that time as well. So it does say specifically peaceably
Yeah, and
assemble.
in fact, when we were talking about assembling and assembling together, this was back in the middle of the COVID stuff. I had this moment where our governor actually got on the radio and everywhere else and was talking about how awesome it was that it was the Black Lives Matter movement had been downtown, and they had been out, and they were disregarding COVID rules, and they were just having this big old protest, and they graffitied things and destroyed stuff and did all of this stuff. And our governor was saying, I am so pleased that these people were willing to risk their lives because they had something that they believed in more than safety.
Risking their lives to be exposed to COVID.
Yes, yeah. And so
because they had something they believed passionately about.
A moral
He didn't say
obligation.
anything about peaceable assemblage or
Right.
non-peaceable.
No, yeah, I think he said moral obligation. They had such
That's
a
right, they had a
moral
moral
obligation, and so they thought that they needed to do this, and so they assembled. And I just remember thinking about that, and then going and talking with the other believers in our fellowship and saying, we have also a moral obligation for us to come together, because that is what the body of Christ does. We come together, we encourage one another, we strengthen each other. And so that was at that point, because we had been very cautiously trying to figure out what was really going on in the world. And at that point, we sort of said, well, I don't know what else is going on in the world out there, but we are called to be a fellowship, and we should be together to do it.
We were peaceably assembling.
We were very peaceable. We were very peaceable. We did not graffiti anything. We did not destroy anything.
Broke no windows.
We broke no windows. We did not do anything bad. But we did peaceably assemble, because in this country we have a law that supersedes a lot of local mandates that says we have a right to peaceably assemble. In the same way, we have a right to speak. However, and this is the point that we made this morning, is we have to be very careful what we mean when we say freedom of speech. And if you need an app on your phone in order to practice freedom of speech, you're not doing it right. Freedom of speech means the ability to come together to speak with one another. It's not about spouting whatever I want on the internet.
Right. As Christians, we have a secondary constitution that we're living by, which is our covenant with our
That is a primary. We have a primary
our
constitution.
primary.
You said secondary.
Second. I meant a second one that we're under.
So
not that it's under this constitution.
So we have
have
our United States Constitution as Christians who live in America. If we live in
Right.
other countries, we need to look at the law of the land there.
But
And
as Christians, we're under, our tongue is supposed to be submitted to our Savior and what we
Yes.
say. And there's a lot in the Bible about what we should say or not.
we have one right here from James. It says in James chapter 1, verse 19, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God."
Right. And in the Proverbs, just verse after verse about thinking before you speak, not just allowing your emotions to speak for you. But I just love that. The wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Us just going off on something and spewing our emotions and our unthought through thoughts for all the world to know is
not
not in
helpful.
our Christian constitution, you would say.
And
It is not helpful. It is
I would,
it hurts the kingdom of God.
Eric,
No,
we're
you're good. I didn't hear something.
don't just interrupt though. We're live right now.
Destroying everything.
All right.
Can you come sit in my lap?
Hey, hold on, Hudson. We're live on.
I'll be with you.
Everyone's listening to us, okay?
How about you sit here and I'll help you finish.
All right.
Almost
So
done.
let me just wrap this up with an example of a way. So with our freedom of speech, there are times with like Peter and John, for instance, where they were told to stop preaching the gospel. And they literally said, well, whether it's right for us to listen to you rather than to God, you be the judge, but we're going to preach about Jesus.
We will obey God rather than man.
We would obey God rather than man.
What they did not say is that I will obey my own selfish whims rather than man.
And so that example is very important, because when I am in the United States and I'm following the United States Constitution, it is possible for me to at times say, now, wait a minute, the law of God actually supersedes the law of the land that I'm in, and I have to talk about Jesus. I have to share my faith. Now, fortunately for me, our Constitution actually protects that. But there are times where a state governor might make a mandate or a state law. Like right now, we have a law here in Colorado that allows for the killing of infants past birth. It's pretty horrible. I don't know the whole details yet. It's like I don't even know what's going to happen with it, but it's been, I believe, signed by our governor. And so, and I don't want to say that if it hasn't been, because then it's libel, right? But I mean,
it's in the works.
It's I believe he signed it. And so here's the thing with
or
that.
like in Canada, they're having the law of the land tell them that they cannot speak out against certain sins that the Bible states is sin.
Yes. And so now you're stuck. Do I obey the law of the land, or do I obey the law of God?
In those places, it's very clear we obey God rather than man. I just think that some people use our rights as an excuse for the flesh.
Well, and
as
here's
Christians,
the
we're not
thing.
supposed to do that.
It doesn't help me to actually go and just spout off all the time about everything. Like if I realize that I'm going to have to break the law to speak about something, so think about Peter and John and the apostles. So what they wanted to be very careful of was not to get in trouble with, say, taxes or any of the other secondary issues, because they wanted to, because if someone comes along and says, yeah, sure, they're going to talk about Jesus, but they also talk about Caesar, and they talk about this, and they talk about that, and they say, well, is this true? And
they didn't pay their taxes, and they did.
And then they come together and say, well, actually, it is true. These are very law-breaking people, but they're also trying to talk about Jesus. Oh, well, that's different. So you want to save your
law-breaking,
your civil disobedience for the times that are most important and most necessary.
Right. And we want to rein in our own impulses on what we're going to say or do by God's law, which has much higher standard than we have here in America, where it does give us freedom of speech, only stopped by if something is libel or slander or some other scenarios like that. There's places where you're not allowed to say things, whether it's media is not allowed to use certain words on certain platforms, or anyway, we don't have full freedom of speech even for the lost.
We don't have freedom to sin.
Yeah.
We don't have freedom to just do whatever we want. We don't have freedom to hurt other people for our own selfishness and our own comfort.
But more than that, as Christians, we need to hold a higher standard to what we say.
Yes.
That everything would be before God, that we would seek truth, that we wouldn't continue to propagate errors that are out there, and that it would be said with love. Those are the laws much higher than our land that we want to govern our tongues.
And I think of it in terms of, like, for myself, recently, our catalytic converter got stolen. And so in our state, we have different standards than all the states around us. And so the question was asked, well, why don't you just take your RV and go to another state and get someone else to do it, or just do it yourself or something? And so I thought about it for a while in this way. Okay, that would be a form of civil disobedience. So if I was convinced that it was a morally wrong law and that it was a wicked law, then I would disobey the law. But do I really believe that this is a totally wicked law, or am I? And so what I came down with was, this was not the place for me to actually use my civil disobedience on.
Right.
I want to wait.
It is an unwise law, but it does not make us disobey God.
It does not make us disobey God.
Yeah.
And so with freedom of speech, whether you're doing it if you think your freedom of speech is being protected by one man because he bought one company, I think you're doing it wrong. You need to think about freedom of speech means, am I free to talk about my Creator and to share what God is doing? That's important. So we need to do that and protect that. So we have quite a congregation of people down here, and
What are the faces about?
Baby Corey might wake up soon, and so we will need to be moving on. So those are our thoughts about freedom of speech. Thank you, Stacy, for joining me and
Thanks
bringing
for
all
having
of
me.
your special guests. And I will see everyone next week. Well, we'll see. Next week we might be at the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, so I'm not sure when we'll actually get to do the next next coffee talk. But
William, what are those
it'll be coming
faces?
on. So blessings. See you next time.